My name is Lejla.
My name is Erica.
My name's Jade.
My name is Nida.
My name's Ebony.
I am
a survivor of domestic abuse. Today I'm breaking my silence.
What is domestic abuse, girls?
I think the fact that I've gone from calling it domestic violence to just domestic abuse now says a lot, because I thought it was just the violence.
I think society just thinks, you know, they don't really understand unless you've been through it. I mean, the words coercive control, you still get deer in headlights, you know, what is that? And it's not just a quick answer. It's so complex.
There is no quick answer, because even if you look at the power and control wheel, so many different elements to it, and then so many different parts of the power and control wheel that victims experience, or maybe some victims experience a part of it and they don't experience the other half. But what I've seen is everything within that wheel: the coercive control, the financial abuse, the sexual abuse, the harassment, the stalking, the intimidation, the threats.
Yep.
Using children, weapons.
Yeah, absolutely. Even pets. Like, I never realised how the foundations of domestic abuse were pretty much the same for everybody. It's just the context is different.
Yeah.
It's power and control.
Yeah. And I think people don't understand that it is the pattern of behaviours, isn't it? It's how it leads up. Like, for example, I remember, right, my abuser, he set me up for this trauma bond from the very beginning. Now I look back in hindsight, right, because obviously it's 2020. And his way of gaining power and control back was to threaten to leave, to break up with me. And he did that a lot. Like, it was every argument. I'm breaking up with you, I'm done.
I'm done with you.
And then I'd beg him back. So by the time that I experienced the first violent incident, he'd already set me up for it. So it's the pattern of behaviours. It wasn't just the first time actually he strangled me. It was everything that had happened leading up to that. And that's the bits that get overlooked, that I didn't even realise is abuse.
I think it's really important, like, you think just because only one part of it's happened to you, maybe it's like financial or something, and because he doesn't hit you, you don't think that it's abuse. So that's why I think it's so important that it is overall domestic abuse, like not just violence, because there is so many different aspects to it, and it's like abuse is abuse, whether it's like physical, like mental, sexual.
I think that's why the phrase domestic violence can be more dangerous than you think, because you hear violence and people just genuinely think, well, they're not being violent,
So
at least not now, so it's not abuse, so I'm okay. Maybe it's just my fault, I'll be better. You know, it gives people the wrong idea, and essentially it's keeping people in unsafe situations.
Absolutely, because they're attaching the violence immediately to the abuse, and they're not thinking, they just don't even have the resources, the education behind what is coercive control, what is gaslighting, what's red flags. I didn't know what gaslighting was. I didn't know that I'd been a victim of it for 8.5 years. It's a really big part of the abuse that I experienced, because I genuinely was made to feel like I was going insane by my abuser.
Well, it's psychological manipulation, isn't it? And I think even that term, it gets thrown around quite a lot now, but, you know, unless you are a psychotherapist or in psychology within that field, you would have heard that word before. You know, you wouldn't have applied it to your own individual circumstance either. It's
because it's so covert, isn't it? Like the emotional abuse is so catered to you. Like,
I don't think that there was even a time in my own experience that I sat and thought, like, what I'm experiencing is domestic abuse. Like, I don't think I ever did sit down and think, wow, this is what I'm experiencing, because it wasn't like a spoken of thing. And I don't know if it's just because I didn't know that's what I was experiencing that I never saw anything on it, but there was nothing at all. Like, I kind of knew what was happening shouldn't be happening, but there was no actual like knowledge behind it to
I just
break
thought
it down.
It was the violence, but now you look back and actually the gaslighting, everything, it led up to the violence.
Because that's how they maintain power and control over you, isn't it? And I think back now that the amount of emotional abuse I experienced, if I told someone, I mean, I'd have to be here for days first and foremost, because it's not straightforward. You don't just say, oh yeah, he said this, he called me ugly or fat or whatever. It was a build-up of things, and they were so nuanced sometimes that it would go straight over your head, and that other people on the outside, they wouldn't see it as coercive control or gaslighting. It goes so unnoticed.
Yeah, I think there's also a degree of intelligence that these people have, and I use the word intelligence because not everyone, I believe, is capable of successfully manipulating someone. So when they're able to do that and change the way you think to make you believe that, you know, what's happening isn't so bad or it's your fault, I think that's why it's so scary to see the reality of what domestic abuse is doing to people and how people aren't able to get out of it safely, and how, you know, even things when it comes to the law as well, when it comes around domestic abuse, how I see it as being so weak at the moment because a lot of these people are getting away with it as well.
But that's as well why I feel like when people say, like, can abusers change and stuff, I feel like they absolutely can't, because to even have that way of thinking that you even, it comes so naturally to you to gaslight somebody and do these things, like, that is your way of life. Like, you don't just suddenly think, oh, the way I've been thinking and the way I've been doing things is wrong. Like, that does not happen.
I'm trying to put some of my experiences, like, into words. But my mental health was used against me all the time. Anxiety, PTSD. Because at that point, I'd already been diagnosed with PTSD, not realising that it was actually complex PTSD because I was in the middle of this abusive relationship.
Did he know that you'd been diagnosed with it?
Yeah, and it
So
was
he
constantly
really
thrown
played
back
on
in my
that.
face all the time. It was things like, oh my God, we're always in this because of your anxiety. And so it was constant, it was me, it was my fault. And then I'd be like, oh my God, I need to get better. And that's how I ended up in therapy. Because he made me, I mean, he gaslighted me so much that I genuinely thought I was ruining the relationship. I thought that it was, I remember crying in front of him. And I said, if I go to therapy and I fix myself, please can we just make this work? Who does that?
Absolutely beyond.
Like I sat in therapy my first few sessions, and I think my therapist knew from the very beginning that what I was experiencing was I was a victim of domestic abuse. And I don't think it was until like the third or fourth session with my therapist when the penny kind of started to drop, and I was like, oh my God, this is not me.
Was you relieved?
No. Because then I really couldn't fix it.
It's the reality of it, then it really is a problem.
I really couldn't fix any of it. And we went to one like assessment, couples counselling assessment, and the counsellor said, you both need to go through these sessions separately because we cannot work with you together, especially whilst you're still in this abusive relationship. And after I left that session, I kicked him out. Because I just knew there was no sorting us out. And then he was desperate to go back to counselling. And then if we didn't go back to counselling, it was my fault, I was ruining everything. So the gaslighting was constantly thrown back on me in a desperate attempt to, I don't know, gain some power and control back. And it's that emotional abuse that goes unnoticed because it's so nuanced. Like no one would actually think that that person is being abusive, but they are, because their aim is to gain back power and control.
Once they realise the power and control is lost, and that's why I said before, like, my abuse heightened after leaving, because once he realised that there was no, like, he had no power over me anymore, that is when he completely lost control of himself. Like, he had no boundaries, he had no limits, there was not one thing he was going to stop at, because all he wanted to do was obviously get me back and get back into that cycle.
You picked up on something really interesting and said about, do you think abusive people can change? What, just kind of picking your brains, what do you think about like, perpetrator programs, or do you think that they work, or do you think that it's just another way to abuse somebody?
Yeah, I feel like it's like almost like enabling, because it's a case of then someone could turn around and say, well, I've gone and done a perpetrator's course now, so I know what I did was wrong. But I just think old habits always lie.
Yeah.
Like they move on to somebody new and, oh, look, I've done this course and this course. Like even in prison, they tell you do a domestic violence course and do this, and then they come out. And I just think like, I think it excuses what they've done, because it's like, well, okay, you've learnt from what you've done, and it's like, yeah, no, I don't.
Do you think abusive people are victims as well because they have maybe gone through some kind of adverse childhood effect?
No. I don't know if it's because I'm bitter, but absolutely not.
No.
I just think I don't care what you've gone through in your life. Everyone has experienced something that could have put them in a situation to do something wrong. Some people turn to drugs, drink. Some people completely go off the rails. You make the choice to abuse somebody when you're doing what you're doing.
Definitely.
You know what you're doing. And if for someone to cry and be pleading with you and be bleeding, and you still continue to wake up the next day and do that, like, no, I don't care what happened to you.
I truly think that once that abuser-victim dynamic is formed, once that trauma bond is formed, it's never going to be healthy ever again.
No. Yeah.
I don't think that is ever possible for that dynamic to change, because it's it's a really deep bond. I remember at the end when I was leaving, my abuser was so desperate again to get me back that he put himself in a perpetrators program. He actually was willing to pay for it privately. This wasn't through the courts, because we hadn't been in court. And as soon as he saw that I wasn't going to go back, he didn't engage in the program. So was there ever an intention to change?
You know, like
No.
with me, like with my abuser, he never used to do the whole, I'm sorry, I won't do it again. He wouldn't even tell me he's not going to do it again, because he knew full well he was. And when he was actually in prison, he was offered to do like DV courses. And he refused, because he said, I'm not the perpetrator, I'm the victim. And he stood by that throughout his whole sentence, and he told them, I'm not doing it because I'm not a problem. He said, these girls are crazy, they've ruined my life. And he actually takes no accountability for himself. And even when he came out of prison, and the only reason he said he would go and do a course was because he said that then in the eyes of the authorities, it looks like he's doing something right, and then we could get back together, and he thought we could live happily ever after, basically, because he was going to do the course for the sake of the authorities, not even for himself, because he feels like what he did to me was wrong. But by then I was already so like educating myself and like learning from Lejla's page and stuff, that I just thought like, this man is actually crazy at this point. Whereas before, even down to a year prior to that, I would have easily fallen into that of him saying he's going to go and do the course. I would have been relieved. If during our relationship he'd said he was going to do a course, I would have been relieved, because I was so trauma bonded to him that I wanted anything, but no.
I never got an apology, because he knew that he was going to do it again and again. And now he's in prison. Like, my victim support officer updates me every year, and you know, she's told me that he's doing courses, but that's not going to change him.
No.
That's just to maybe get him out on good behaviour earlier. I do not believe that he will change at all.
Absolutely
And it's
not.
never going to change what they did.
No.
I don't think there's nothing my abuser can do.
No.
There's nothing he can do. I don't need to forgive him. I don't need him to admit what he did was wrong, because I know what he did was wrong now. Do you know what I mean? Like, I don't need a sorry. I don't need any of that.
Even just like for you to say that, I think is so important, because I think when girls are leaving, they're like, what if he changes for somebody else? What if he's different for somebody else? What if he goes on to be happy?
Closure.
And I think it doesn't matter what he goes on to do, because what he did to you cannot be forgiven. He's done what he's done to you. So whether he goes on to the next person, whether it takes a year, whether it takes 10 years, old habits will always lay. But it's not for you to get pent up on, because it's about then rebuilding yourself and understanding that, you know what this person did to me was so bad that I don't care what he goes on to do
it doesn't
with
change
somebody else, because it doesn't change the situation.
Was there ever a time you really did think, like, in your relationships, this is going to get better?
Yeah. I think after I had my second child, I thought he did. I think for about a couple of years, there was nothing. There was no abuse, like physically. There was, now that I look back, the emotional abuse was there. You know, he'd be like, you're mentally unstable to look after the boys. You know, it's because of you I do what I do, or what I've done to you in the past. he really made out that he was changing, but he didn't.
Just
towards the
gaslighting
end.
you, just making it seem
Literally.
like it was your fault.
I had my third boy, and that was it. That was when it got worse, probably the last 9 months.
I don't think there was ever a time that I thought it was going to get better. Like,
No.
genuinely, I just thought that's how I'm going to die. And I don't think that at any point in the relationship did I think that things was ever going to get better, because it was just a daily occurrence, and it becomes so routine. It was just life. And on every occasion, I would beg him, like when he'd be beating me, and I'd say to him, please kill me this time, like actually kill me, because I didn't see any way out at all, like at all. And when I discovered I was pregnant, like that was absolutely it for me. I was like, that is it, like literally gonna die at this point. Like,
there was a point where when he was physically abused, I just couldn't even speak. It was
No
like I
fight
was
left
just
in
there,
you.
and I just let him do it,
yeah,
because I thought that's
literally
it.
no fight
This is my
left.
life now, so that's it. Just keep on doing
It's
it.
like not seeing a way out, like
No.
when you're in it. But I think for me, I didn't know what was happening to me was abuse, because the gaslighting was so real for me that I always thought it was my fault. I didn't get apologies. I think I got one apology 2-3 years after he threw me through the door with the glass, and it was this really like sorrowful, woe's me, you know, I just feel awful for what I did to you. And I was like,
he feels bad.
oh my God, this man, he's never going to do it again.
Because he feels bad this time. Like,
Yeah. But then the emotional and mental abuse never stopped. And it got to the point where I started counting the knives in the knife block, because I thought, what if?
Yeah.
What if? And then I'd quickly be like, oh, don't be so silly. He's never going to do that. Really? Because he was capable of doing everything else.
Yes.
Yeah.
That, like, I think so many people are in that situation where they think, oh, he would never do that to me. Although he does this, he would never take it that far. They take it that
Yeah,
far.
they do.
They take it
Even
that
like
far.
the threats to harm you. I'm going to punch you. That happened to me quite a few times.
And it's illegal.
Yeah. All of this is illegal. That's the main, actually, this is a crime.
Actually,
And because we are with these people in relationships, it's like no one sees it as a crime.
no,
I don't even think we do.
No, we didn't. I definitely didn't.
I didn't
Romanticise it, really.
Yeah.
I did for the whole relationship until a third party stepped in and told me exactly what it was. I thought, why are you trying to ruin my fairy tale?
Yeah.
I was so angry. I was so annoyed. I was almost sentencing myself, you know, a life of not what I had it in my mind, but I was so desperate to get that I didn't want anyone to get in the way of it. And I think that's where you are so just trapped in that cycle that people are looking from the outside and you think they're trying to ruin
what you
your
have,
fairy tale.
Yeah.
But I think, like, even with my abuser, he would fuel that. Like, he would say, oh, this person, because they're jealous of us, and and like, I actually believed it. And now when I look back, like,
I did.
Jealous of what? Like, yeah, seriously, I used to actually sit and think, like, he would tell me, like, my friends, they're just jealous of us. Like, they're jealous of what we have. And I feel like we had that thing of where he would always say to me, you won't meet anybody like me.
Oh my God,
And
I heard that all the time.
even after leaving, when I would, like, eventually after a couple of years and I started getting to know other people and stuff, it was almost like I was looking for him in these people. And that's how I knew at that point I was not ready to move on, because they would say certain things and I'm like, well, he would never have said this, or he would do this. And it was like, I actually the bond was still there, and it's only now that it's completely gone. And I'm like, I wouldn't look for you in a bin, like, like, honestly.
But do you think that if he walked through that door right now, do you think that you would feel fear of going back and slipping back into a trauma bond?
No, because there was in 2020, March 2020, he'd not long been out of prison and he contacted me. Obviously, we have a restraining order, which is never ending. It's reviewed every 5 years. But he was just like, pack your stuff, let's go, let's leave. We can leave the country, we'll run away. And he was telling me like how much he loved me, how he couldn't be with anybody else. And I did. I think because it was lockdown, I was feeling very low. I was at work, like I kind of started to engage in the conversations. And then it was only when he started talking about the authorities and that he'd spoken to a solicitor, and the solicitor had said that if I agree to mediation, we could go from there. And at that time, I didn't know that mediation couldn't be done if there's been abuse in the relationship. And I found myself like starting to agree, and I started trying to convince my mum that he just wants to see his child, and she was adamant she would never speak to me again. And then one particular night, I sat and I was thinking about all the things that he'd done, and I gave him a breakdown in messages of like, you remember when you knocked me unconscious and blah 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 blah. And he replied saying, "You've sad bub, you've ruined the whole vibe." Like, and that's when the reality hit me, and I was like, this man is never gonna change. And I straight away I was like, if you contact me again, I am going to report it. And I said to him, like, I'm going to report myself to social services and stuff and tell them that I have slipped back into the situation, because I didn't want him to have anything over me to say, oh, well, if I'm so bad, why is she talking to me? So yeah, no, now, never. Like, there is nothing, to be honest, I'd be at fear for himself, because I just think, like, the rage that I would feel of the audacity, that no, I would never.
I think that one thing that's really important that you said is that victims and survivors should know is that you don't have to go to mediation with your abuser.
No,
That's really important for them to know, because so many victims will fall for that as part of their post-separation abuse. Like, I mean, I'm 2 years since leaving my abuser, and the post-separation abuse is still real. I still get called all the names under the sun if I don't give in to what his demands are. I mean, it was just a few days ago he called me a dog in front of my child.
That is like... just unreal.
And then I received a whole barrage of abuse about how I'm the toxic one, how I'm mentally unstable, how I'm ruining my daughter's life. And I mean, like, we're 2 years down the line now. And
it's still, you've left, you've actually removed yourself from that situation, but because of having that tie of a child, I like, that is something that obviously I've not experienced that, because it was ruled in court that he had no contact at all, and if he wanted to seek contact, he would have to get a solicitor, and it would have to go through court before he could even have any form of access. And obviously he's never bothered, so I haven't had to have that experience, but I feel for like all of you that
it's
do.
not easy, because the abuse just doesn't end. And it comes about in different ways, and it's mostly done through the child or children and the access to them.
Tactical.
And I've had to, the post-separation abuse, the emotional abuse was so bad for me that I had to cut complete contact down to emails, and even that he's abusing now. And so now I'm at this crossroads where I'm like, well, what do I do? Because my daughter's still young, right? So this is going to continue for years
many
and years. Especially the more we talk about it, the more I use my voice, the more I use my platform. I know it's just going to get worse for me. I know it's going to escalate. And I'm stuck in this, like, place where I can't do anything about it, because I can't prove the emotional abuse. I can't go to the police and be like, my ex-husband's still emotionally abusing me because, look, he called me a dog. Because they don't understand that it's a pattern over and over again of what he's done in the last nearly 10 years now. So I think a way to end this, and I know we're all going to say the same thing, do we think abusers can change?
Absolutely not. Never. Never.